Where did we leave off last time? Right. Forrest had chosen to jump off the cliff to avoid being mauled by the angry female leopard. If I were in the same situation, I would done the same, even without the leopard part. Anyway, as we get back to the story, Forrest seemed to be struggling against the current. Next moment, he realized he had landed in a lake. Looking up, perhaps the trees and branches on the cliffside had cushioned his fall, and plunging into the lake had saved his life. Just then, he noticed someone floating in the water behind him. Moving closer, he recognized this was the girl who got knocked off the cliff by the lightning leopard. Her face and clothes seemed slightly charred. Luckily, she was still breathing. Without hesitation, Forrest lifted her up. Not much time to feel the smooth and soft texture of her skin through the combat suit. Setting her down under a massive tree, she turned out to be really good-looking and seemed about his age. Yet surprisingly, she was already a fourth-tier martial artist, making Forrest believe she must have been a prodigy from a prestigious family. Suddenly remembering he hadn't eaten all day, he turned around and noticed there were plenty of fish in the lake. We fast forward a bit, and now he was roasting the newly caught fish on sticks. Next to him is where he left his wet clothes hanging to dry. Even without seasoning, the fish turned out to be more tasty than he expected. Just then, Forrest felt something behind him and turned around to see a sword thrusting at him. Seeing him clad only in his underwear and bare-chested, the girl demanded to know what he had done to her. Frantically, Forrest explained he had saved her. Eyeing him suspiciously, then glancing at her own body, she finally relaxed. Meanwhile, Forrest continued munching on the fish, jokingly saying she didn't need to pledge herself as a favor. Taken aback, the girl looked away and huffed. However, Forrest wasn't bothered, even complimenting her for having a good voice. He then handed her a freshly roasted fish. The girl hesitated but eventually took a bite. Forrest then introduced himself, and after the girl found a spot to sit, we learned that her name was Laura. She then asked Forrest what he wanted, saying how she didn't like owing anyone. She tells him to state his desires, and then they could part ways after, or else she hinted she might have to kill him. Oof, what a hasty girl. Is she serious? Forrest thought to himself. He thought for a bit, then suggested how about letting him become just as strong as her. However, this was met with a harsh critique from her saying Forrest lacked talent, causing him to stumble and tears to well up in his eyes nearly. Talk about a smackdown, am I right? As dusk fell, Laura, still clutching her long sword, settled down at a nearby tree to rest. Meanwhile, Forrest, sitting nearby with sparks in his eyes, hadn't forgotten about the lottery draw he earned from killing the martial artist that morning. The familiar interface of a large spinning wheel appeared once again. Forrest struck a dashing pose, held his breath, and watched the wheel begin to spin. Excitement surged through him as he prayed to the RNG god for a weapon. The pointer on the wheel slowed down, seemingly about to stop on the Federation coins, prompting Forrest to curse loudly. However, in a stroke of luck, the pointer twitched slightly and landed on the jackpot. The system then announced, "Congratulations, Master. You've won the jackpot. The wings of 100 birds." Overjoyed, Forrest couldn't help but hug and kiss the interface. Turned out, this jackpot was a technique card, created by martial artists of the 6th tier or higher. These cards contained the essence of a martial skill and allowed the user to fully master the technique. Furthermore, they came in 4 levels, with higher levels having greater power. Initially disappointed to see it was merely a bronze-level card, which happened to be the lowest level, and it was also a spear technique, one of the harder techniques to use too. However, Forrest's mood lifted when he noticed the number 1 on the card. Turned out, this wasn't just any card, it was a growth technique card, even more precious than a diamond-level card. These cards allow the technique to level up alongside their user. His initial disdain turned into affection as he kissed the system screen once again. Now, all he needed was to find a long spear. Laura was roused from her rest by Forrest's incessant giggles. She approached Forrest, looking at him as if looking at an idiot. Suddenly, she turned her gaze sharply in one direction and asked if he heard anything. Straining his ears, Forrest also heard something. Perhaps there's an adventure team nearby. Remembering a previous encounter with such a group, they couldn't risk assuming whether these newcomers were friends or some naughty enemy. To be safe, it's best to leave the area. But Laura was too weak to even stand. Having spent the day with her, Forrest had begun to understand her temperament. He bent down in front of her, prepared to carry her on his back. Laura was clearly reluctant, prompting Forrest to playfully scare her into compliance. As he hoisted her up, Laura's face became slightly blushed. As they hurried away, the group found the already extinguished campfire and knew there were people nearby. The guy leading the group let out a sinister smirk as he ordered them to find them and kill them. After running for some time, Forrest complained about Laura's weight, teasing that she should start losing weight. Laura retorted that it was her sword that was heavy, not her. Amid their banter, Forrest suddenly stopped. Something was approaching them, using his eye of analysis to identify a creature in front of them as a Tier 2 red-winged serpent, and its combat power was 670. Though it didn't look particularly strong, at the same time Laura handed him her own sword. Forrest didn't hesitate and took it, only to find the sword surprisingly heavy, making him curious about the material it made out from. He then remembered seeing Laura effortlessly swinging it with one hand, which made him acutely aware of their difference in strength. Laura urged him to stop asking so many questions and put her down and go fight the serpent. She then tells him about the creature's characteristics and instructs Forrest to follow her lead. Suddenly, the serpent dashed towards him, but Forrest was struggling to keep up with its speed, likely due to the darkness impairing his vision. Laura quickly instructed him to swing left, which he missed. She then told him to thrust downwards, so he did, and this time he successfully pinned the serpent's head onto the ground. That was quite easy, and Forrest couldn't help but feel a bit smug, but Laura simply rolled her eyes at him and continued to jab at his ego, saying that took him long enough. Forrest decided to take his anger out on the serpent he had pinned to the ground while showing him the middle finger, but in the next instant, with a whoosh, the serpent's head snapped off and flew straight at him, biting his arm. Forrest forcefully pulled the serpent's head off his arm and threw it on the ground, stomping on it fiercely. Only then did his system notify him that he had gained 2,500 experience points. As he blew on the wound, he knew he should be paying more attention to system alerts in the future. Behind him, Laura couldn't help but chuckle. Forrest figured that she clearly knew about this but hadn't warned him. Returning to her usual demeanor, she retorted that he never asked. However, just then, Forrest suddenly felt a sharp pain in his arm, and soon his entire body began to heat up. Seeing this, it was then she realized the grave mistake she made, forgetting what the venom can do. Forrest, unable to control himself, lunged at Laura, who tried to back away but tripped due to her injuries. She crossed her arms over her chest, trying to protect herself. In his last moment of clarity, Forrest quickly asked Laura how to counteract the poison before his lips found hers in a frenzied kiss. Wait a second, that took a random turn. The next second, the sudden pain of her biting his tongue snapped him back to reality. Furious, Laura threatened to kill him if he didn't back off. Forrest quickly retreated, apologizing and insisting he hadn't meant it. All right, folks, we all know the chance of this happening in real life is close to zero. Anyway, he then spotted a lake nearby and plunged into the lake, letting the cool water soothe the intense heat raging through his body, while still reminisced on what happened earlier. Meanwhile, Laura, still visibly upset, sat beside a large tree, not happy to see her little prank had backfired on her. Meanwhile, someone had spotted her and noticed that she was injured. Quickly sensing people approaching, she drew her sword and began to back away slowly, while warning them to leave now or face death. The four men, who had witnessed Laura being thrown off the cliff earlier, approached her with a mocking sneer and knew very well that she wasn't in the best shape. As Laura tried to fend them off, her weakened state caused her to stumble and fall. The leader ordered the men to restrain her. Laura attempted to use her family's name to intimidate them, but they scoffed at the threat, knowing too well that if she died here, no one would ever find out. Just as the pervert was about to lick her face, it was then that a stern voice cut through the tension, questioning if they wanted to die. Everyone turned towards the voice, just to see someone slowly walk towards them. Meanwhile, Forrest had already assessed their strength. Aside from their leader, who was a second tier, the rest were all first tier. To their astonishment, Forrest was not only able to correctly say their name, but also their combat power, which shocked the group. Forrest didn't seem to be wearing any devices, yet he could precisely state their info, which was utterly baffling. With a stern look, Forrest continued, as he was about to give them 5 seconds to leave. The group gulped and quickly sprinted away. Witnessing the scene led them to believe Forrest was a high-tier martial artist protecting Laura. After helping Laura to her feet, Forrest was asked how he figured out all of that. Forrest smiled and said it was his secret. He then hoisted her onto his back and continued their escape in a different direction. Not long after, one member of the small squad sneaked back to take a look and discovered that the two had already left. It was then that they realized they had been tricked. There's no reason for a high-tier martial artist to leave so quickly. The leader of the group, infuriated, punched a giant tree nearby, gearing up for retaliation. Meanwhile, Forrest and Laura didn't head towards the outskirts, but instead ventured deeper into the forbidden zone. Laura asked why. She is aware that the deeper they go, the more powerful beasts they will encounter. But only Forrest knew that their pursuers were likely aware of Laura's injury and would expect them to try and exit the zone quickly, probably waiting for them at the perimeter. Forrest's plan was to let Laura heal here over a few days before they attempted to leave. Laura nodded, slightly impressed as she commented, although Forrest has no talent. He isn't as dumb as he looked. Ouch! That's the third time today. Not long after, they were both exhausted and quickly fell asleep. The next morning, surrounded by towering trees, he found his arms wrapped around a soft body. He jolted, and just as he expected to not make it out alive today, Laura's eyelashes fluttered, and Forrest braced himself. The next moment, Laura's eyes snap open, sensing an evolved beast nearby. Forrest looked ahead, but saw nothing, but Laura said she could smell it. As they cautiously moved out, after a night's rest, she was able to walk, though she needed another 2 days to fully recover. She handed her weapon back to Forrest, noting that the nearby evolved beasts were all at least second tier, perfect for Forrest to improve his combat skills. Their first encounter was with a second-tier saber-tooth boar, boasting a combat power of 800. Laura explained its characteristics and its weaknesses, and under her lead, Forrest quickly killed it. Time flew by, and quickly 2 days passed. Forrest, wielding Laura's long sword and following her guidance, had killed 30 evolved beasts, raising his level to 9. He marveled at how well Laura, being so young, knew every beast's traits and weaknesses. Under her lead, he even defeated 2 third-tier beasts. Forrest collected every crystal core and wanted to share it, though Laura showed no interest in them, letting Forrest keep them all. By the time Laura had fully recovered, her demeanor had grown even more distant. Now, it was finally time for them to part ways. He hesitantly asked about her plans, to which Laura paused before saying she was heading back to find the lightning leopard, just as Forrest waved her goodbye. Well, do you remember the awkward moment when you said goodbye to someone, but ended up walking the same way? Yeah, it happened here too. Despite the awkwardness, Forrest was surprised that she still wanted to go for the leopards. Moments later, she tells him that she won't fail this time. As she walked ahead, Laura suddenly turned around and told him that the next time they met, if he was still weaker than her, she might kill him. Forrest was taken aback. What the hell was wrong with this woman? Why was she so violent all the time? Nonetheless, Laura then leaped into the air and Forrest called out to her, asking where is she from. Moments later, a faint sound echoed from a distance. The sanctuary, she replied. Forrest shook his head, slowly making his way toward the perimeter, walking cautiously and looking all around. Perhaps after all these days, those people would have left by now. Just as he thought this, a massive sword swung towards him. Forrest quickly bent down to dodge. A tuft of his hair was sliced off in the process. Forrest swiftly countered with a slash of his own, only to see that it was a member of the earlier adventure team attacking him. The guy was surprised to see Forrest was the only one, but he was not about to let Forrest go. Glancing around, Forrest didn't see anyone else, and knew he needed to get rid of this guy quickly before they came over. The guy unleashed a bronze-level technique, making his giant sword seem to transform into a serpent's shadow, striking at Forrest. Forrest blocked with his weapon, but the impact sent him flying several meters. Although he had learned new martial techniques, he was without his spear. The good news is, his rage gauge was now at 90%. The guy looked down scornfully, spotting Forrest was not as a high tier, but merely as an entry-level who hadn't learned any techniques. The guy charged again, however, after the recent battle against numerous evolved beasts. He is so much more skilled now that he quickly blocked the attack, just enough to fill his rage gauge to full. The system then prompted whether to use the boost, and Forrest quickly confirmed. In the next second, Forrest unleashed the forbidden technique. Not gonna lie, guys, I don't even know what he named this technique. Maybe the future offspring destroyer, the egg cracker, or perhaps the family tree chopper. Either way, he aimed a kick at the guy's crotch. Seeing the attack, the guy sneered and taunted. Is that all you got? Quickly, he reached to block the kick with his hand. However, he was caught off guard when a loud crack sounded from his hand, and every bone in his hand shattered. In the next moment, a more painful event occurred. Let's just say his egg cracked. I mean eggs. Plural. The weapon slipped from his hands, and he fell to his knees. Forrest gave him no chance, quickly swinging his weapon to finish him off. With that, Forrest advanced to level 10 and unlocked a new skill, Explosive Anger. Using it would significantly increase his strength, speed, and stamina for 10 minutes, though it would leave him extremely fatigued for 5 minutes afterward. Forrest was excited seeing a new skill. He then allocated all his potential points to speed. Just as Forrest was about to relax after the fight, he was suddenly surrounded. The group saw the body on the ground and glared coldly at Forrest. With the full squad here, 4 tiers 1 and the leader being a second tier, Forrest seemed to be in some trouble. The leader didn't want to take the risk and drew his weapon, then ordered everyone to attack together. Without hesitation, Forrest activated his newly acquired skill, Explosive Anger, just as they believed they had killed Forrest, just to see Forrest remained unscathed. The leader couldn't believe his eyes. At the same time, it seemed as though Forrest's aura had also grown stronger. What the hell is going on? Before he could react, Forrest had vanished from the spot, prompting the group to frantically search in different directions. Forrest, meanwhile, hid behind a tree, knowing that even with Explosive Anger, he couldn't take on 5 of them at once. He planned to get rid of them one by one. Seeing one of the men wielding a long spear, he knew who was going to be the first target. Forrest leaped down and snapped the spear wielder head before he could react, picking up the spear and sheathing his sword. Not far from them, one of the men saw what happened and quickly reported to the rest of the team, and then rushed at him. This man unleashed a bronze-level technique, but Forrest countered with his newly learned martial art, the wings of 100 birds. At that moment, all of Forrest's power surged into the spear, the tip of which burst into flames like a fiery phoenix. The next second, the spear pierced through the attacker's chest. The remaining members arrived just in time to witness this scene. They were shocked and knew they couldn't hold back. As the 3 of them used their techniques, they lunged at Forrest all together. But Forrest stood undaunted. Facing the 3 remaining members, he focused on defense, and his rage gauge was already at 60%. They were surprised to see Forrest able to defend all of their attacks, and the leader deduced that Forrest had boosted his abilities with some sort of secret technique, but suspected it wouldn't last very long. However, at the same time, Forrest's rage gauge had fully filled up once again. With a powerful boost attack, he struck towards the leader. The leader hastily tried to block with his weapon, but in an instant, it shattered into pieces. He frantically jumped backward as Forrest unleashed another, the wings of 100 birds. However, the spear simply couldn't withstand the power, and soon broke into countless pieces. Forrest had missed his chance, and felt the effects of his Explosive Anger skill fading, and his body visibly weakened. The leader almost pissed his pant, looked down, and breathed a sigh of relief knowing he barely survived. Letting out a cold smirk, he picked up the nearby spearhead from the ground and lunged toward Forrest. Just then, a streak of red light stopped him. From a distance, a figure approached, dressed in a lab coat, glaring coldly at the leader. She then questioned, who gave him the courage to attack a student of her academy? The leader was momentarily confused and wanted to ask who the woman was, only to be told he didn't deserve to know and had 3 seconds to run. The 3 of them looked at each other and quickly ran away in panic. Looking at the woman in front of him, he finally realized that this beautiful school doctor was actually a 4th tier. The woman's demeanor changed as she turned to Forrest, playfully licking her lips, no longer calling him Little Forrest, instead called him Big Forrest. She was also surprised and quite impressed that Forrest nearly wiped out the entire adventure team. She winked at him and flirtatiously added, "You're quite fierce, I like that." Forrest, now familiar with the school doctor's temper, changed the topic and asked why she was there. She tells him that she is the school doctor, naturally. She came to treat the students. She checked Forrest all around and instructed him to strip down for a thorough treatment. Forrest stepped back quickly and wondered about how it seemed every encounter with her involved removing clothes. He quickly said he was fine and not injured. The doctor moved closer, teasingly asking if he was sure he didn't want treatment. Forrest shook his head and refused again. "Oof, boy. You are missing out, you know." Anyway, she then smiled and helped him up, walking him towards the gathering point, however. Whether by accident or not, his elbow touched something soft. Not far away, the teacher began to tally the crystals collected by the students, nodding with satisfaction at their achievements. However, They were one person short. Chubb had relied on what happened, and how they had encountered a third-tier giant python, and Forrest had run into the forbidden area. Flit, standing nearby, was sure Forrest was dead, which led to a rebuke from the Chubb saying how Filt had run away like a wuss earlier. The teacher quickly intervened to stop the bickering, while most of the other students didn't seem to care whether Forrest was dead or not. After a short while, the dude who got his ass kicked by Forrest just a couple days ago became impatient, insisting Forrest was surely dead, and there was no point waiting. A voice rang out asking, "Who did you say is dead?" Everyone turned around and saw it was Forrest. Forrest then pointed at the guy, and asking if he had forgotten just how many bones he had broken recently, as he doesn't mind helping him remember.